My father was Harry Balson, was liberated from here. He was very, very sick and was very, very close to ending up in one of these dreadful ovens where they put people once they had died or once they had dissected them and taken the gold and anything of value from their mouths and body. And my father had typhoid when he was in this camp, and Itzhak Pomerantz saved his life by keeping his bread, keeping the bread that he'd was given one roll every day, and the other boys that were alive tried to steal it. Thought he won't need it anymore, he has typhoid, he's going to die. This really was about people, saving their own lives at this point. This was death and starvation. And Israel Pomerantz kept them, said, no, I will not let that happen. And he kept them, and he nursed my father back to health, and my father survived coming into this very, very room where he would have been put in, where his ashes would have then been put through these ovens. And standing here today just makes me realise how close we all were, how close my family, my generations, my wife, my son and daughter Jack and Emily, we never would have been here. So this is it's hard to speak, it's hard to say anything, but it really is quite incredible, quite extraordinary.
My dad was one of the boys. His name was Aaron Zilberschutz. He came from Lodz, and he lost his whole family. He was literally an orphan, and the 732 children were his family. They were always in our house, they grew up together, they were like brothers, and they were my uncles. And coming back here was very important to see, feel, understand what my dad went through and how possibly he might have felt when he was here. It was this morning when we were standing having that picture taken and thinking about those children in the centre of Prague having their picture taken at the same time. It was exceptionally emotional, yes. And I just thought, what were those children thinking? Were they thinking about where they'd come from? Were they thinking about where they were going to? Or, as somebody said to me, were they just thinking about food? My father never spoke about any of it. I actually still don't know. I'm still learning. There was a book recently that I read about the Lodz ghetto, and I found a story about my uncle who was the head of the mafia in the Lodz ghetto. And there was information about him and the family there, and I learnt a bit. So my father is in the second picture, but I've been showing these pictures to people on the coach, and nobody's seen these pictures before, so everybody was looking for their parents and they found them there, which is fabulous. My dad, I believe, is in this picture, and he is there, and his name's Aaron Zilberschutz.
My dad, Sam Laskia, he arrived here on open wagons from Buchenwald, and I think the trip was about 4 weeks, and when they got here, many of the wagons were, the people just didn't survive, but when they got here, and they came into the sidings of the camp, and there were no soldiers, there was no shouting, there were no dogs, and they realised they were about to be liberated, and then the Russians came in. So in a way, my dad's arrival into this camp was one of freedom and not imprisonment.
We're here to remember and celebrate their liberation, but also remember that there's a real political importance of being living testimony and memory to those who died in the Holocaust, especially when you've got far-right and fascist governments on the rise. And I'm wearing a badge that says unemployed against the Nazis, and it is a badge that was made from a British political group called the Anti-Nazi League, and they were set up in response to the National Front, who were a fascist group operating in England, and they were really horrible anti-immigrant Holocaust deniers, and the Anti-Nazi League was key in pushing them back and fighting back alongside them, and it was a really brilliant movement that we should remember and celebrate, and we should all be anti-fascists.
This place is to remember because we have to be aware that on a place like this it could possibly end if we don't keep our democracy, if we don't try to do everything possible to keep the society democratic. So this is very important, especially now when it is so in Europe and in the world in general. We see the spread. I mean the race of nationalism and Nazism, etc., etc.